Hello BookTube! Today I am bringing you a quick December reading wrap-up. Page-wise, December was a pretty good reading month for me. I got a considerable number of pages read, and for the most part I really liked all of the books I read. 4 things, 3 of which I have physical copies, 1 of them was digital, and I'll just go in order that I read them. So first up, I finished reading Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I started this at the end of November. I got just a little bit of the way into it and then drove myself to get this finished because I won't lie, it was okay. It wasn't my favorite. And this is really bizarre. I mentioned this in my last video. When it comes to the Harry Potter movies, I really love The Prisoner of Azkaban and I really love the Order of the Phoenix movies. And I don't really like the Goblet of Fire movie. However, reading the books, I quite enjoyed the Goblet of Fire book. I liked parts of the Prisoner of Azkaban, and again, liked parts of this one. But this book really drove home. I'm not a huge fan of Harry's character. He's okay, but he's boring. And in this book, he spent, I think, at least the first half, probably 2/3 of this book, just being a whiny ass going, woe is me. And I understand that, like, I do understand his frustrations. People are hiding things from him, but at the same, and he's gone through something terrible at the end of Goblet of Fire, obviously. But he's just so obnoxious. And Sirius Black is pretty obnoxious too. He's so petty. And I guess it makes sense. And I think that's the problem. Like, the actors and the way everyone is, the adults in the movies are all about a decade older than they are in the book. And so in this book, I mean, he's considerably younger, so it sort of makes sense that he's more obnoxious. I don't know. I did cry. I was sad. However, the fight scene at the end was kind of weird and convoluted, and again, I thought that was kind of handled better in the movie because it's just more concise. This is sort of weirdly drawn out. The other thing is, in this book, so there's a fan theory I read that said, what if the Dursleys are as bad as they are because they've been living with a Horcrux? And in this book, I think you really start to see kind of Voldemort's influence on Harry's personality. Like some of his bitchiness is Voldemort. Like, I feel like it leads a certain amount of credence to that fan theory. Like, maybe the Dursleys are as terrible as they are, and maybe they don't like him as much as they do because they have literally had a Horcrux in their house for 15 years. I don't know. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. The next thing I read was part of my Jane Austen read-along, and that was Emma. I took a lot of notes because it's been years and years and years since I read this book. I read it when I was quite young, probably too young to really appreciate it. I remember struggling to get through it when I was a kid. This time around, I pretty much flew through it. I read the last, gosh, I want to say 150 pages in one sitting. I love Mr. Knightley. I think Emma is funny. One thing that really struck me on this read through is how much I really love the relationship between Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. And I'm not going to go into detail here because I'm going to do a whole little discussion of this book and really talk about my feelings on that. But it was really delightful to read this, and I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing I read in December, I don't have a physical copy of. I checked it out from my library, and that is A Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulter. The third thing I read in December, I do not have a physical copy of it. I checked it out from my library, and it is A Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulter. Now, this book, I originally heard about it on BookTube from Cece over at Problems of a Book Nerd, and I'll leave a link to her channel in the description bar down below. You should definitely check her out, especially if you like YA or queer YA. That she kind of has a focus or an emphasis on queer books, and it's great. Now, A Fire and Stars is about 3 kingdoms and a princess who is betrothed to the prince of a neighboring kingdom. And it starts out she has to go to that neighboring kingdom and she's going to marry him. He has a sister, and eventually the 2 princesses fall in love, and there's a lot of drama. Okay. So fantasy lesbian princess novel. Sounds like my cup of tea. As a kid, I loved Gail Carson Levine. I really loved Ella Enchanted, and I really loved The Two Princesses of Bamar, which is a book about sisters, so it's obviously not the same thing at all. But in my head, when I heard about A Fire in Stars, I thought, ooh, maybe this is the queer answer, the queer YA answer to The Two Princesses of Bamar. And so I actually requested my library to buy a digital copy of this book for checkout, and I was the first person to check it out. I was that excited for it. So when I say I gave it a 1.5 stars, you can just imagine my crushing disappointment. I've written quite a lengthy review of the book, and I'm going to do a more in-depth review of it and kind of talk about all the reasons I gave it such a low rating, because man, that was by far my most disappointing read of 2016. So like I said, I gave it 1.5 stars. Yeah, look for the review video. So I had a December TBR, and the first two books that I mentioned were on that TBR, and then I had two nonfiction books I said I was going to read. I didn't read those at all. I was going to read them for a writing project that I've decided to put off for about 6 months, so I will come back to those books at a much later date. But the morning that I went to the library, I was reading a sample of a short story collection by Catherynne M. Valente called The Bread We Eat in Dreams on my phone. It's really beautiful. And while I was at the library, I decided to see if they had the whole book. They didn't. It was checked out, unfortunately. However, I did pick up two other Catherynne M. Valente books, and I read one of them at the end of December, and that was Six Gun Snow White. And oh my gosh, after the really sad disappointment of Fire and Stars, I am so glad that I picked this book up and I read it, because this was a 5-star read for me. This book is so delightful. The tagline says, a fully loaded fairy tale, and man, it is. If you've never read Catherynne M. Valente, she is an extremely lyrical, poetic author style. It is so great. And no, like I said, I've read the first short story from The Bread We Eat in Dreams, and I've read this, and both of them are written in such rich, beautiful language, and they have very different feeling to the language. Even though it's like the same, just top-notch language, they have very distinctive voices to serve the distinctive needs of their stories, which is really a mark of, I think, a great writer. This is a Western retelling of Snow White. And let me tell you something. Reading the first half that's narrated directly by Snow White, it was as though I was sitting across from her in a saloon and she was whispering the story to me over a hand of poker. It was so clear. I could hear her through the words. Like, that is, I can't rave about this book enough. And so just to give you a little snippet, this is from Snow White Fights a Lump of Pitch. I do not believe any person is born knowing how to be human. Everyone has to learn their letters, and everyone has to learn how to be alive. A is for alligator. B is for beauty. Maybe it's not a lesson so much as it's a magic trick. You can make a little girl into anything if you say the right words. Take her apart until all that's left is her red, red heart thumping against the world. Stitch her up again real good. Now, maybe you get a woman, if you're lucky, if that's what you were after. Just as easy to end up with a blackbird or a circus bear or a coyote or a parrot just saying what's said to you, doing what's done to you, copying until it comes so natural that even when you're all alone, you keep on calling, hello, pretty bird, at the dark. When Mrs. H said I was not human, she meant I was not white. She was wrong about the reason, but not about the thing. I wasn't human. I was a small device who knew only how to shoot a gun, play the slots, and dress up in fancy clothes to please a rich man. Nobody had ever loved me proper, and if there's a boring story in this world, that's it. I want to skip this part. I want to pull on the arm of my slot machine and let the rolls flip over until they show a green tree in the summertime and me away from that house, walking tall under a blue sky. I want to skip this part, but I am here to tell you. A stepmother is like a bullet you can't dig out. She fires true, and she fires hot, and she fires so quick that her metal hits your body before you even know there's a fight on. I didn't even know what white was. In this retelling, Snow White is half Crow, Native American, and half white. And so it deals with identity, it deals with race, it deals with white, it deals with whitewashing. It also touches on things like how you make women in white society. There's an interplay between white witchcraft and Native American folklore. For such a little book, there's so much going on in this, and it's such a beautiful read that I just, like I said, 5 stars, highly recommend it. Check it out, especially if you like fairy tale retellings. It's really accessible. It's not complicated. The language is not so dense that it's difficult to understand. So if you want to dip your toe into more literary fairy tale retelling that are kind of ugly and gritty, but not super dark, then I think it's a great place to start. So anyways, that's what I read in December. It was a little rocky. It was a little rough. I had a few long reads to get through, but man, Six Gun Snow White was a great note to end an otherwise turbulent year. Let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments, or if any of them sound good to you, and I'll see you in January. Bye.